Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Arush Buhalka, and today I am going to present the class on basics of lens. The moderator of the class is Dr. KCSO. So, in today's class, we will learn about the embryology, anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry of the lens. The first, the embryology of the lens. The formation of the human crystalline lens starts very early in the embryogenesis. Some of the important dates are that optic vesicle is formed on day 25, the lens placode on day 27, the lens pit on day 29, the lens vesicle on day 30, the primary lens fibers on day 40, and the secondary lens fibers on day 49. Now, when we move to the process of embryology, the brain and the eye develop mostly from the anterior region of the neural plate. The neuroectodermal cells at the apex of the neural folds proliferate and produce a population of neural cells. The region of neural plate destined to form the prosencephalon shows linear thickened area on either side, which soon becomes depressed to form the optic sulcus. Meanwhile, the neural plate becomes converted into the prosencephalic vesicle. As the optic sulcus deepens, the walls around the prosencephalon overlying the optic sulcus bulge out to form the optic vesicle. The proximal part of the optic vesicle becomes constricted and elongated to form the optic stalk. Now in this figure, as you can see, this is the surface ectoderm and this is the optic vesicle. The optic vesicle extends laterally and it becomes closely approximated to the surface ectoderm. Now on day 27, the surface ectoderm the surface ectoderm overlying the optic vesicle becomes thickened to form the lens placode. The growth factors of bone morphogenic factor family are required for the formation of the lens placode. The lens pit develops on day 29 as an indentation on the lens placode. As the lens pit deepens and continues to invaginate, while the stalk of the cells connecting it to the surface ectoderm undergoes apoptosis, separating it from the surface ectoderm. This results in a sphere of single-layer cuboidal cells enclosed in a basement membrane called as the lens vesicle. As the lens vesicle is forming, at the same time, the optic vesicle starts to invaginate and forms a two-layer optic cup, which later forms the retina. The cells in the posterior layer of the lens vesicle stops dividing and starts to elongate. As they elongate, they begin to fill the lumen of the lens vesicle. On day 40, the lumen is totally obliterated. The elongated cells are called the primary lens fibers. As the fibers mature, they lose organelles and makes the embryonic nucleus, which is present in the center of the lens. Cells in the anterior lens vesicle remains mononuclear cuboidal cells, which forms the anterior lens epithelium, and subsequent growth of the lens is because of this. Now in this diagram, as you can see, this is the anterior lens capsule, this is the posterior lens capsule, this is the anterior lens epithelium, this is the posterior lens epithelium. You can see the posterior lens epithelium elongates and starts to fill the lens vesicle. On day 40, it's completely obliterated the lens vesicle. Now we can see the anterior cells persist as a single layer of cuboidal cells. These cells will continue to divide and the cells along the equatorial ridge will begin to form the secondary lens fibers. The secondary lens fibers are laid down concentrically and depending upon the period of development, they form fetal, infantile and adult nucleus. As you can see, the fetal nucleus represents the lens fibers from 3 months till the birth. The infantile nucleus represents the lens fibers from birth till puberty, and the adult nucleus corresponds to the lens fibers during the adult life. Nuclear bow. Now, as the lens fibers elongate anteriorly, the nucleus of the cells also moves anteriorly. So, the nucleus of the deeper cells will remain anterior to the nuclei of the superficial cells. So, if a line is drawn to connect the nuclei of the cells, it will be arcuate shaped anteriorly. This configuration of the nuclei is known as the nuclear bow. The lens sutures. As lens fibers grows anteriorly and posteriorly, a pattern emerges where the ends of the fibers meet.
Arush, can I
Yes.
just interrupt for a second?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. At the formation of the optic vesicle stage, if you go back a few steps, At this stage here, as you can see, the the lens vesicle is forming inside. And that is the stage when certain genes kick in, like the PAX gene and the SOX2 gene. So that is what initiates this movement of the lens vesicle formation.
Yes.
The two genes, PA6 is very, very important, and SOX2 at this stage. Those gene expressions at that stage cause this formation. Right. Okay.
Okay, sir.
And secondly, just one more point, sorry. I just want everybody to note, can you go back one step? Yeah. So at this stage, you can see that only the anterior epithelial cells remain. The posterior epithelial cells have disappeared, leaving only the capsule there. These have all become the primary lens fibers, filling up the lens vesicle. Okay. Right. Yeah, I can go ahead, please.
Lens sutures. As the lens fibers grows anteriorly and posteriorly, a pattern emerges where the ends of the fibers meet and interdigitate near the anterior and the posterior pole. These patterns of cell association are called sutures. These are recognizable by 8 weeks of gestation. The anterior lens sutures are erect Y in shape, while the posterior lens sutures are inverted Y. As the lens continues to grow, the pattern of lens fibers become increasingly complex. So in this video, we can see this is the optic vesicle and this is the surface ectoderm. So first the lens plecoid is formed, then the lens pit, and finally the lens vesicle is formed, which detaches from the surface ectoderm. Now the posterior lens epithelium elongates to form the primary lens fibers, which finally forms the infantile nucleus. Zonules of Zinn. The zonular apparatus is a three-dimensional complex of microfibrils composed predominantly of the protein fibrillin and aggregate into fibers passing from the inner surface of the ciliary body to the outer surface of the lens capsule. They develop from the neuroectoderm in the ciliary region at 10th week of gestation. They are the continuation of the internal limiting membrane that thickens over the non-pigmented epithelium of developing ciliary processes. Tunica vasculosa lentis. Around 1 month of gestation, the hyaloid artery which enters the eye at the optic nerve head branches to form a network of capillaries on the posterior capsule of the posterior lens capsule. These capillaries go towards the equator of the lens, where they anastomose with a second network of capillaries known as the anterior pupillary membrane, which are derived from the ciliary vein that covers the anterior surface of the lens. The tunica vasculosa lentis disappears by an orderly process of programmed cell death shortly before the birth. But if it doesn't, then the remnants are formed, one of which is Mittendorf dot. It is a small white dense dot inferior nasal to the posterior surface of the lens. It marks the place where the hyaloid artery comes in contact with the posterior surface of lens in utero. Other remnants can be a Burgmeister papilla, which is seen as a tuft at the optic disc, and more marked manifestation is the persistent fetal vasculature, or earlier known as the persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous (PHPV). It is usually unilateral. The white fibrous retrolental tissue is present, often in association with the posterior capsular opacification.
1 minute, can I just stop there? Sometimes you find the whole hyaloid artery itself fibrosed as a strand extending from the disc to the back of the nucleus, the posterior surface of the nucleus. So it's just a fibrosed strand which will be there. That is also a possibility. And PFV, persistent fetal vasculature. What are the signs of it? Can anybody say? Any of the first years? Or any of the first years want to volunteer? If there is persistent fetal vasculature, what are the signs in the eye? You have elongated ciliary zonules, okay, prominent iris vessels, and of course a developing cataract there. Okay, nobody is wanting to answer? Anybody can volunteer in the middle and answer, okay? Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Other congenital abnormalities are congenital aphakia. Aphakia is the absence of the crystalline lens. It can be of two types, the primary aphakia and the secondary aphakia. The primary aphakia is when the lens plecoid fails to form from the surface ectoderm, while the secondary aphakia is in which the lens is developed to some extent, but then it gets resorbed. The secondary aphakia is more common than the primary aphakia. Lens coloboma. A lens coloboma is an anomaly of the lens shape. A coloboma refers to a focal absence of a tissue layer, typically occurring from the incomplete closure of the fetal fissure. The lens coloboma can be of two types, a primary coloboma and a secondary coloboma. A primary coloboma is a wedge-shaped defect in the lens periphery that occurs as an isolated anomaly. while a secondary coloboma is an indentation of the lens periphery caused by the lack of ciliary body or the zonular development. It may be associated with the coloboma of iris, optic nerve, and retina.
Arush, stop for a second there. About the anterior pupillary membrane, which disappears shortly before birth, the remnants can remain as epicapsular stars. As you see, if you look carefully on the anterior capsule, you'll see like pigmented star-shaped areas. Those are remnants of the anterior pupillary membrane. Also, sometimes you see iris strands running across the pupillary region. Those are also remnants of the anterior pupillary membrane. Yeah, okay. Please.
The lenticonus. Lenticonus is a localized cone-shaped deformation of anterior or the posterior surface of the lens. It can be an anterior lenticonus or a posterior lenticonus. Anterior lenticonus is rare and usually bilateral. It may be associated with Alport syndrome, spina bifida, and Waardenburg syndrome. As we can see, an Alport syndrome consists of a sensorineural deafness, a progressive renal failure, and ocular anomalies like anterior lenticonus. While the posterior lenticonus is more common and usually unilateral, it may be associated with persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, remnants of hyaloid artery, familial posterior lenticonus, Loeys syndrome, and trauma. The Loeys syndrome consists of congenital cataract, mental.
Can anybody say the ocular anomalies in Alport syndrome, apart from anterior lenticonus? Anybody wants to volunteer? Ajiba Sherin?
Sir, I don't know, sir.
Okay. Does anybody else know? You can have dot and fleck retinopathies at the macula with this Alport syndrome. Those are the ocular anomaly. And sometimes you can have recurrent corneal abrasions also. Erosion syndrome. Recurrent corneal erosion syndrome also you can have with this. Okay. And you're now doing Loeys syndrome. Yeah, okay.
The Loeys syndrome consists of congenital cataracts, mental retardation, and renal tubular dysfunction. Macrospherophakia. Macrospherophakia is a developmental anomaly in which the lens is small in diameter and is spherical. The entire lens equator can be visualized at a slit lamp when the pupil is widely dilated. The spherical shape of the lens results in increased refractive power, which causes the eye to be highly myopic. It may be associated with disorders like Peters anomaly, Marfan syndrome, Loeys syndrome, and Weil-Marchesani syndrome. Like in Weil-Marchesani syndrome, there are systemic symptoms as well as ocular findings. The systemic findings may be a short stature, brachydactyly, mental handicap, while the ocular findings are microspherophakia, anterior lens dislocation, angle anomaly leading to glaucoma. Now, Peters anomaly. Peters anomaly characterized by central or a paracentral opacity.
Sorry, just about, can you just go back? Microspherophakia, what is the, what are the other things that can happen in microspherophakia in the eye? What can it lead to?
So it can lead to ectopia lentis also.
Yeah.
Glaucoma.
Yeah, what kind of glaucoma?
Angle closure glaucoma, sir.
Angle closure? Or is it a pupillary block glaucoma?
Yes, sir. Pupillary block glaucoma.
Yeah, and so it gets aggravated by what?
Meiotic.
Myotics, yeah. And relieved by cycloplegics. Okay. And iridotomy. Okay, yeah.
So can I move forward?
Yeah, oh, please, yeah.
Peters anomaly is a central or a paracentral opacity which is associated with thinning or absence of adjacent endothelium and Descemet's membrane. It's a part of anterior segment dysgenesis syndrome. Usually, there is a deletion of one allele of the gene normally involved in the anterior segment formation, as already told, like PAX6 gene, PITX2, FOXC1 gene. The Peters anomaly can be of two types, type 1 and type 2. In type 1, the iris strands are often adherent to the cornea, while in type 2, the lens is adherent to the posterior cornea. Like in this figure, we can see this is a lenticular-corneal adhesion, which signifies the type 2 Peters anomaly.
So in Peters anomaly also you can have microspherophakia. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, please. Yeah.
Ectopia lentis. It is a hereditary or acquired displacement of the lens from its normal position. It can be of two types. It can either be subluxated or dislocated. A subluxated lens is partially displaced from its normal position but remains in the pupillary area, while the luxated or a dislocated lens is completely displaced from the pupil, implying the separation of all the zonular attachments. The most common cause of ectopia lentis is traumatic. Other causes may be metabolic disorders like Marfan syndrome and homocystinuria. It can also be congenital. So if we look in the Marfan syndrome is autosomal dominance and inheritance. It has both systemic as well as ocular findings. In systemic findings, we have tall stature, arachnodychmyle, high arched palate, and cardiovascular anomalies. In ocular findings, the most common finding is bilateral.
What are the cardiac anomalies in Marfan syndrome?
So you can have patent ductus arteriosus.
What's the
So you can have mitral valve prolapse,
Yes.
aortic regurgitation, aortic dissection.
aortic regurgitation, dilation of the aortic root and aortic regurgitation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what are the other features? Of course, you have described arachnodactyly, high arched palate, Gothic. It's called a Gothic palate. And what else are the systemic features that you see? Patient is very tall,
Yes, sir.
long arm span, the greater. I mean, it's the arm span from finger to finger is greater than the height of the patient. So if you take the measurement, say from the pubic symphysis to the floor, it will be more than double that, the arm to arm, the length. Okay, so it will be more than double.
Yes, sir.
And even when they stand, their fingers will reach below their knee many times.
Yes, sir.
And they have pectus excavatum, which is not only usual to Marfans, also with homocystinuria, the same kind of habitus, tall habitus with pectus excavatum, but they don't have the spidery fingers. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you're coming to that next, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine.
The most common ocular feature is bilateral ectopia lentis, which is generally found in 80% of the patients. It is most frequently in the superior temporal quadrant. The ectopia lentis occurs because the zonule contains fibrillin. A mutation of the fibrillin occurs in the Marfan syndrome, leading to the weakening of the zonules that leads to subluxation of the lens.
Which chromosome?
Yes, sir.
Which chromosome is?
Chromosome 15, sir.
15, yes. Okay.
The other ocular findings are glaucoma, lattice, retinal degeneration, and retinal detachment. Other metabolic disorder is homocystinuria. It is autosomal recessive in inheritance. There is a decreased enzymatic metabolism of methionine, which results in high levels of methionine and homocysteine. The systemic findings we find in homocystinuria are blonde hair, blue iris, malar rush, Marfanoid habitus, neurodevelopmental delay. In the ocular findings, there is ectopia lentis, which is typically inferior nasal. Here, the zonules contains high amount of cysteine normally, which is deficient in homocystinuria. That is why the zonule disintegrate, leading to the loss of accommodation. As you can see in this figure, there is an inferior subluxation of the lens and there is zonular disintegration. It may also be associated with iris atrophy, optic atrophy, cataract, myopia, and retinal detachment.
What do you advise patients with homocystinuria? What can be advised?
So we generally advise pyridoxine B6.
Sorry? Diet rich in cysteine.
Yes,
And vitamin B6.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now moving on to the anatomy of the lens. A lens is a transparent biconvex asymmetric spheroid. It's an avascular structure. The anterior and the posterior surface are paraboloids that limit spherical abrasions. The lens is enclosed by a capsule which is attached to the ciliary body by the ciliary body processes by the lens zonules. The center and the posterior surfaces are called the anterior and the posterior pole, while the circumference of the lens is known as the equator. Now, the dimensions of the lens. The distance between the poles is measured as the lens thickness. The thickness of the lens is 3 mm at birth, which increases to 6 mm in older people. The equatorial diameter of lens is 6.5 mm at birth, which reaches 9 to 10 mm in adult life. The anterior surface of the lens is less convex and has a radius of curvature of 10 micrometer. This is because the radius of curvature is inversely proportional to the curvature. This is why the posterior surface is more curved, but the radius of curvature is less, that is 6 micrometer. Now, the location of the lens. The lens is located between the iris and the vitreous cavity in a saucer-shaped depression known as the patellar fossa. The posterior surface of the lens capsule is in contact with the vitreous and is attached to the circular manner to the hyalodocapsular ligament, also known as the Vigert's ligament. The potential space between the hyaloid face of the vitreous and the lens capsule is known as the retrolentil or the Berger space. Structures of lens. A lens is an avascular structure and it is divided of nerves. It consists of three parts: the capsule, the lens capsule, the anterior lens epithelium, and the lens substance or the lens fibers. The lens capsule is analogous to the basement membrane and is basically composed of type 4 collagen, which is combined with glycosaminoglycans. The capsule is produced anteriorly by the lens epithelium and posteriorly by the elongated fiber cells. Synthesis of the capsular material appears to persist throughout the life at the anterior part of the lens, but not at the posterior surface. As we know, at the posterior surface, the posterior lens epithelium has already been developed into the infantile nucleus. It has variable thickness at different areas. It is very elastic in younger patients and becomes more rigid as the age progresses. In this figure, we can see the variable thickness of the lens capsule. It is thickest in the pre-equatorial region and it is thinnest at the posterior pole. The extreme thinness of the posterior capsule makes it more vulnerable for posterior capsular tear or rent during the cataract surgery. The anterior lens epithelium. It's a single layer of nucleated epithelial cells interconnected with gap junctions and desmosomes. It's the only metabolic active part of the lens having the highest metabolic rate. Functionally, it is divided into two areas, the pre-equatorial area and the central area. The pre-equatorial area are columnar cells which are actively dividing and differentiating into the lens fibers. The central zone consists of cuboidal cells that transport solutes between the lens and the aqueous. Secretion of capsular material. It has also been found that sodium-potassium pump is also found in the anterior lens epithelium. Lens fibers. Lens fibers are hexagonal in shape and bond together by the ground substance. Their dimensions are about 8 to 12 mm in long, 7 micrometer wide, and 4.5 micrometer thick. The superficial lens fiber shows some moderate interrotations between the adjacent cells, but deeper lens fibers have distinct interlocking processes, which resembles the ball and socket joints and tongue and groove indentations. The purpose of these interlocking mechanisms are to prevent the slippage of cells against each other when the lens changes shape during the process of accommodation. Zonular fibers. The zonular fibers can be classified as orbicular anterior capsular fiber, orbicular posterior capsular, cilio-posterior, and cilio-equatorial. Like in this diagram, we can see the orbicular posterior fiber starts just near the ora serrata and are inserted on the hyalodocapsular ligament in the posterior capsular lens. Now the cilio-equatorial fibers. The cilio-equatorial fibers arise from the valley of the ciliary process, passed almost directly and inserted on the equator. The orbicular anterior fibers, as you can see here, are the strongest fibers and arise from the pars plana, moves anteriorly and gets inserted to the equator, just anterior to the equator, while the cilio-posterior fibers, which are here, arise from the ciliary process, pass posteriorly and get inserted on the posterior capsule. There is a newer classification of ciliary zonules which consists of pars orbicularis, which converts into zonular plexuses, which converts into zonular fork, which have the anterior, equatorial, and the posterior zonular limbs. So in this figure, we can see this is the pars orbicularis. It's a part of zonule which lie over the pars plana. Then this is the zonular plexus. This is a part of zonules that lie between the ciliary process. Then it forms the zonular fork, and finally the posterior, the equatorial, and the anterior zonular limbs. Here we can see there are primary zonules, secondary zonules, and tension zonules. The primary zonules are zonules attached to the lens, while the secondary zonules are zonules that connect the primary zonules with each other, and the tension zonules are which where the primary zonules to the basement membrane of the valleys of the ciliary process. The zonules usually attach to the pre-equatorial and the post-equatorial region of the lens capsule, approximately 1.5 mm from the equator. Now we will learn about some of the spaces between the zonule fibers. One is canal of Petit and the other is canal of Hanover. The space between the pre-equatorial zonule and the post-equatorial zonule is known as the canal of Hanover. It is generally filled with fine fibers of equatorial zonules. The space between the post-equatorial zonule and the hyaloid zonule is known as the canal of Petit. The hyaloid zonules are the single layer of fibers which connect the anterior hyaloid vitreous at the border of the patellar fossa to the pars plana and pars baccata. Now we are moving on to the physiology and biochemistry of the lens. In this topic, we will learn about the molecular biology, why the lens is transparent, the metabolism of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats in the lens, diabetes and galactosemia, the antioxidant mechanism of the lens, water and electrolyte balance, and age-related changes in the lens. Now, the lens is composed of 65% of water and 34% of the protein. It consists 1 to 2% of carbohydrate, lipids, and electrolytes. The lens proteins can be divided into water-soluble and in a water-insoluble fraction. The water-soluble fraction consists of crystallins, which are further divided into alpha, beta, and gamma crystallins, while the water-insoluble fraction is further divided into urea-soluble and the urea-insoluble fraction. The urea-soluble fraction generally consists of the cytoskeletal proteins, while the urea-insoluble fractions consist most of the lens fiber membrane proteins that includes the major intrinsic protein. Now, when we talk about the crystallins, the alpha crystalline is the largest crystalline, which constitutes 31% of the total proteins. Alpha crystalline performs a key role in preserving the lens transparency, not only as a structural protein, but it acts as a lens chaperone, where it binds to partially denatured proteins and prevents its aggregation. It consists of two subunits like alpha A and alpha B. The beta crystalline is the most abundant.
Can I stop you there? It's closely related to the heat shock protein.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then the other one is beta and gamma. Yeah.
Yes, sir. The beta crystalline is the most abundant crystalline, which constitute about 55% of the total proteins. It is the most heterogeneous of the group, consisting of 6 distinct subgroups. In humans, 4 of which are found. The gamma crystalline is the smallest crystalline and is the least abundant, that is 2%. The recent studies have revealed a link between its mutation and congenital cataract. The usual component of the cytoskeletal system, like the microfilaments like actin, vimentin, spectrin, are there in the lens, but there are some lens-specific intermediate filaments also, like the beaded filaments. Now,
what are those beaded filaments called?
So BSAF.
Sorry?
1 and 2. So they are further divided into BSAF 1 and 2.
Okay. Did you mention about that phakinon and filancin?
Yes, sir. So those are the different name of BSAF 1 and BSAF 2.
Yeah. Okay. And vimentin.
Yes, sir.
And what is the use of this major intrinsic protein, MIP, the urea insoluble one? What is it? It's a...
So it provides the transport. It helps in the transport, and as well as the structure.
Otherwise called aquaporin.
Yes, sir. Aquaporin 0.
Aquaporin O. So
yes,
that provides the gateway pathway for water molecules. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can continue, please.
Yeah. So why the lens is transparent? It is dependent upon many factors. The first being there is a single layer of epithelial cells which are not thick. There is a lamellar arrangement of the lens proteins. The pump mechanism of the lens fibers that regulate the water and the electrolyte balance, thus creating a relatively dehydrated state. The semi-permeability of the lens capsule, the avascularity of the lens, the regular arrangement of the lens fibers. Also, during the development, as the organelles disintegrate, It also helps in lens transparency. Also, the extra compact with the little extracellular space, so that the zone of discontinuity are very small as compared to the wavelength of the light. High percentage of reduced glutathione in the lens maintains the lens protein in reduced state and ensures the integrity of the cell membrane pumps.
Well, 1 minute. Can I just stop you here? Just want to go back about connexins. Have you heard of these cell proteins called connexins?
Yes, sir.
C43 and C50. They are help to cause adherence of the fibers, lens fibers together also, as well as allowing permeability of solutes, including glutathione, into the lens fiber.
Yes, sir.
Connexin C43 and C50. Okay, yeah.
Now we are moving upon to the metabolism of lens. The first is the glucose metabolism. The glucose enters the lens from the aqueous humor both by simple as well as facilitated diffusion. It is usually metabolized mainly by the anaerobic glycolysis at 80%, while the Krebs cycle is only 3%. It can also be metabolized by the HMP pathway and the sorbitol pathway. While in one cycle of anaerobic glycolysis generate 2 ATPs and the Krebs cycle generate 36 ATPs. In HMP pathway and sorbitol pathway, no ATPs are generated, while in the HMP pathway, reduced NADPH is formed, which is important for the function of the glutathione. Now, this is a diagram showing
through the HMP and what percentage through sorbitol pathway.
The sorbitol pathway generally activates when there is there is excess of glucose, like in diabetes mellitus.
Excessive glucose, yeah.
Yes, sir.
But 5% goes through HMP pathway.
Yes, sir.
Around 5% through the sorbitol. Okay. Okay.
This is a diagram showing the glucose metabolism. As we can see, the glucose is first converted into glucose 6-phosphate by the enzyme hexokinase, which is the rate-limiting enzyme. Then it goes under the anaerobic glycolysis, which finally forms the pyruvate, which can again converted into can go into the citric cycle, which can perform the 36 ATPs. The glucose 6-phosphate can also be converted into 6-phosphogluconate by glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. In this process, the NADPH is produced, and the pathway goes into the HMP shunt pathway. While if there is excess of glucose, the glucose is then converted into sorbitol by the enzyme aldose reductase, and then the sorbitol is converted into fructose by the enzyme polyaldehyde. This enzyme has a low affinity towards the sorbitol, so a lot of sorbitol is accumulated before it gets converted into the fructose. As we can see, the citric acid cycle is an aerobic glycolysis which only occurs in the epithelium as it contains the mitochondria. The epithelium also has the aldose reductase, so the sorbitol pathway also occurs here. Now we are moving on to the diabetes mellitus and the lens. In diabetes mellitus, as there is increased amount of glucose in the plasma and the aqueous, there is a saturation of the hexokinase enzyme, which leads to the piling up of the glucose, which finally activates the sorbitol pathway, and there is a formation of sorbitol and fructose. Increased level of sorbitol and fructose leads to the increased hydration and draws the water into the lens, which finally leads to the swelling of the lens and a myopic shift. There's a curvature change of the capsule. There's a rupture of lens fibers and vacuolation of the cortex. Also, there is lens protein disruption and disorganization of the collagen fibers, which leads to the loss of transparency and finally leading to the cataract formation. Also, the presbyopia occurs very early in the diabetes mellitus because the glycogen deposition in the ciliary body that reduces its functions. Also, there is increased amount of hydration in the lens, as well as the lens capsule becomes thickened. Now, galactosemia and the lens. Well, galactosemia is an inherited autosomal recessive disorder in which there is inability to convert galactose to glucose. As a consequence of it, there is availability and excess galactose accumulates in the body, which further is metabolized to galactitol, which finally forms the cataract in the eye. In the classic form of galactosemia, the galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase is an enzyme which is deficient. This is the oil drop cataract of the galactosemia. Now, the protein metabolism.
What are the systemic signs of galactosemia? What will happen if uncontrolled you keep giving milk proteins to them?
Lactose intolerance.
Only just lactose intolerance? Is that all that will happen?
Sir, irritability and convulsions.
Okay. It can affect the liver and can cause jaundice and mental retardation and failure to thrive.
Yes, sir.
And what is the treatment to withhold milk and milk products for them? What is a simple test you can do for galactosemia? Simple urine test for what? Urine test for reducing substances in the urine. Okay.
Benedict's test.
Benedict's test, very good. Yeah, Benedict's. That's for reducing substances in the urine. But that doesn't mean that there are many other reducing substances in the urine. It can be glucose, it can be galactose, fructose, mannose, anything it can be. Okay, so they are not the only reducing substances. But if you see a patient that you are suspecting with oil drop cataract, you can send them for urine for reducing substance. Okay. And mental retardation also can have, if it's not diagnosed properly, and it can also lead to infertility in females. Okay. Yes.
Now, the protein metabolism. The protein synthesized from the amino acids that are actively transported from the aqueous. Synthesis of new protein ceases with the lens fiber formation, and all the changes that happens after this stage are post-translation modification. Many phosphorylation systems exist, like cyclic AMP-dependent protein kinase A and phospholipid-dependent protein kinase C, which help in phosphorylation of many proteins, like crystallins, cytoskeletal proteins, and aquaporin O. In addition to the enzymatic activity is seen in the crystalline proteins, the lens have several other proteolytic enzymes, including endo and exopeptidase activity and the membrane-associated proteases. The lipid metabolism in the lens. The lens consists of a high concentration of sphingomyelin, cholesterol, and saturated fatty acids, which ensures the rigidity to the cell membrane, which is required for the intercellular connections. Especially the cholesterol bilipid configuration ensures high level of cholesterol in the neighboring regions, thus maintaining the stability of the membrane, even if there is significant change in the membrane phospholipid. Also, high levels of phosphodiene-inositol seen, which signifies receptor-mediated second messenger activity in the lens cells. Example, the responsiveness to the hormones and the catecholamines. Now, the antioxidants in the lens. The first antioxidant is glutathione, which is synthesized by the lens and is present in the reduced state. We will learn how the glutathione works in the next slide. Other enzymes are superoxide dismutase and catalase. The superoxide dismutase converts the superoxide ion into the hydrogen peroxide, which is later broken down by the enzyme catalase. Also in the lens present is ascorbic acid and vitamin E. Inositol and taurine are the osmolalite possessing antioxidant properties. Now this is a glutathione scavenging pathway. In this we can see the H2O2 is converted into H2O with the help of glutathione peroxidase, but a reduced form of glutathione is required, which by this reaction is converted into the oxidized form of glutathione. So for this oxidized form of glutathione to again be converted into the reduced form, we require the glutathione reductase and NADPH. This NADPH we get from the HMP shunt pathway. And this is how the glutathione converts, is an antioxidant and helps in conversion of hydrogen peroxide into the water. Now, ions and metabolites. The lens is less hydrated and has higher levels of potassium and amino.
Can I just stop here? What are the free radicals that are possible, which possibly cause damage?
So in the lens, the oxygen species are less because it doesn't have much of the oxygen environment. Directly, the free radicals damage the DNA and the RNA in the lens.
Yeah, what are the free radicals that are responsible?
So we have hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. We have superoxide ion.
Singlet oxygen.
Yes, sir.
LOOH, lipid peroxide, and MDA, malonyl dialdehyde, These are all the free radicals, which have to be mopped up by different mechanisms, which are glutathione peroxidase, catalase, superoxide dismutase. Okay, these are the enzymes that help to mop up the free radicals.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The ions.
Free radical scavengers.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ions and metabolites. The lens is less hydrated and has higher levels of potassium and amino acids than the surrounding aqueous and the vitreous. Conversely, the lens contains lower levels of sodium and chloride ions than the surrounding environment. The cation balance between the inside and the outside of the lens is a resultant of both the permeability property of the lens cell membrane and of the sodium potassium pumps, which resides in the cell membrane of the lens epithelium and each lens fiber. The sodium potassium pumps function by pumping the sodium out and pushing the potassium in. The ions and the metabolites can either be active or have a passive transport mechanism. Those having the active transport mechanism are the amino acids, potassium, taurine, inositol, and extrusion of the sodium, while the passive transport mechanism occurs in water, ions and waste materials of the metabolism like lactic acid and CO2. There is a hypothesis which is known as the pump leak hypothesis. So this is the combination of the active transport and the membrane permeability is often referred as a pump leak hypothesis. According to the pump leak hypothesis, the potassium and the various molecules such as amino acids are actively transported into the lens via the anterior lens epithelium. Then they diffuse out with a concentration gradient to the back of the lens where there is no active transport. Conversely, the sodium flows through the back of the lens with a concentration gradient and then is actively transferred for exchanged for potassium by the anterior epithelium. In the support of this theory, an anterior-posterior gradient was found of both the ions. The potassium was more concentrated on the anterior part of the lens, while the sodium was more concentrated on the posterior part of the lens. Now, what are the changes that happens in lens due to the age? These are mostly caused by the glutathione depletion and changes in the crystalline. As there is increase in the insoluble pool of proteins as the age increases, and with that is associated with the oxidative changes that lead to protein and protein to glutathione disulfide bond formation, leading to the depletion of the reduced glutathione. In this figure, we can see the crystallines when there is increased oxidation and decreased antioxidants can be oxidized. Also, due to other modification, they can be misfolded crystallines. And by the proteolysis, there are crystalline fragments. All the three oxidized crystalline fragments and misfolded crystallines can cause protein aggregation and light scattering. Now, what are the other changes in the lens due to the age? There is a dysregulation in the cellular metabolism as many enzymatic activity decreases in lens with age. There is decrease in the level of cellular ATP. There is increased water content that causes phase separation between the protein-rich and the protein-poor regions of the cells. Although there is an increased light scatter, which has been caused by the aggregation and formation of the gel-like state, some workers also believe this is due to synerism, which is a conformational change to the protein-released bond water, enhancing the difference in the refractive index between the drier protein region. Also, loosening of the interdigitation between the cells lead to the water clefts and vacuoles within the lens substance. Recently, a gene has been formed that is EPA2 gene, which is associated with a congenital and age-related cataract. It was mapped on chromosome number 1. It's the first gene to be identified that cause hereditary non-syndromic age-related cataract. Now, if we want to summarize the events in old age, we can see with the old age, there is decrease in the function of active pump. There is reversal. So because of that, there is reversal of the sodium-potassium ratio, which leads to the hydration of the lens. And finally, there is denaturation of the proteins. Also, with the increase in age, there is decreased level of amino acids, which leads to a decreased synthesis of lens proteins. And finally, there is a reduction in the reduced glutathione, which leads to the opacification of the cortical fibers. These are my references. And thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Casey sir for the guidance and seniors for helping me with the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarush. That was a nice presentation. want to take any questions from anybody? Before we do that, I just want to tell you about galactosemia. What is the enzyme that is the culprit in galactosemia?
So the galactose 1 phosphatidyl transferase, GALT.
Yeah. What are the other two enzymes which cause the metabolism of galactose? Galactokinase and UDP epimerase.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and another point I want to say is increasing oxygen levels within the eye. The lens is housed in a very hypoxic area. So the moment oxygen levels increase, if you, for example, premature babies were given large amounts of oxygen, then that increases the level of cataracts also. Also, when you have, after vitrectomy, the oxygen levels increase, and that can contribute to nuclear sclerosis after vitrectomy, because the oxygen levels increase around the lens.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And few more things. The anterior lens, the anterior zonular fibers are inserted onto the, the posterior zonular fibers are inserted into the anterior lens capsule, right? So what is the zonular free zone? You said the zonular free zone is around 6 millimeters or something, just now you presented.
Yes, sir, ma'am. It is around 6 mm from the center. So that is why
is it constant? Does it change with age? And if so, how? Anyone can answer. Final years probably. Anybody has any idea? Because you're all doing cataract surgeries, right? With age, the zonular free zone starts shrinking. It is because as you grow older, the lens thickness increases as well as the overall diameter, right? So whatever is the point of insertion into the anterior lens capsule continues to remain the same. So as the cataract lens thickness grows, the zonular attachment point moves towards the relative center of the eye. So that's why when you're doing your capsulorhexis, sometimes you end up taking the capsulotomy into your anterior zonular insertion area. Okay, and why do you have uveitis with in a hypermature phacolytic eye, whereas you don't have that when you have a traumatic rupture of the lens? It is not the same. What is the difference in the mechanism between a ruptured anterior capsule where you have fluffy lens matter floating around, and it can be controlled with topical steroids because the inflammation will be mild, whereas in phacolytic glaucoma, it is only after the cataract is removed, it settles. So final years, what is the difference? Similarly, you told about the lens getting hydrated during the because of diabetes, how the lens hydration and all takes place. So what is the applied anatomy related to that? One is your cataract formation. Anything else? When a patient is not under control, his diabetes, do not prescribe glasses. You told about a myopic shift, right? So if it's a diabetic patient who suddenly come with a change in refractive correction, ask him about his diabetes control before you prescribe glasses, because otherwise tell him to control his diabetes, come back for a re-refraction. Otherwise your retinoscopy will be wrong.
Also regarding, sorry, can I just say something?
Yeah,
also,
please.
Regarding insertion of the zonules, it's around 1.5 millimeters in the anterior surface and 1.25 on the posterior surface, little more on the anterior surface.
Can I add a few points, sir?
Yeah.
Yes. So one thing regarding the sutures you were talking about, so why sutures? So if you see, there are 9 to 12 faint lines on the lens where the fibers come and meet. So applied anatomy for that is these sutures actually help you while doing chopping once you do phaco surgery. So these are the points where the chopping becomes easy. So you can literally part the nucleus into 7 to 8 segments. So these sutures help in that. Second thing, regarding the elasticity of zonules and the anterior lens capsule. So they give elasticity of around, in a normal anatomy of the lens, 1.5 millimeter from zonules and the anterior lens capsule of 1.5 millimeters. So total like 3 millimeter. So what happens once you manipulate while doing your capsulotomy or rhexis, So that much elasticity is produced naturally. So you can't afford to have that in a pseudo exfoliation eye or in a pathological or any trauma and all. So that elasticity literally helps you in little manipulation, what you do in capsulotomy or axis, and same thing while doing trenching in your phaco. One more thing, in diabetic cataract, you were talking about what is the most accepted theory, Arush? That you didn't tell. What is the most accepted theory of diabetic cataract?
So
you didn't
it
mention.
leads to the accumulation of the sorbitol.
But that is not the most accepted theory. The most accepted theory is glycosylation of proteins, right? Have you read about it? Is the glycosylation of proteins which is the most accepted theory, not the sorbitol. Okay. Yeah.
Can I interrupt? Okay, just one question. What causes pigment?
I think he's mentioned something about lens pigmentation. That's the question. What is the role of porphyrins in the eye, in the nucleus? Arush?
So what's the role of?
Porphyrin metabolism.
Copper metabolism.
Porphyrins.
Porphyrin. So I don't know.
Well, you must read and tell me.
Okay, sir.
Why is what is the brownish pigment called in dense mature cataracts? Brownish pigment. It's called urochrome. Urochrome.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
One more thing, I mean, it's written in Stennert book of cataract surgery. It's a very interesting point. They say that the lens is the only organ in the body which you can't study in vitro. So once you take out the lens from a cadaveric eye, once you keep it in the artificial medium, it doesn't hold its natural shape and no, the biochemistry, whatever. That's why they say that, I mean, you whatever kinds of cataract or different forms of cataract you say in vivo in the human eye, we really can't study the organ outside. So that's why till now the different forms of cataracts, and in the same age group you see cortical cataracts or nuclear cataracts based on different etiologies and pathologies. There are a hell lot many things, but you really can't study that in the laboratory, unlike other organs where you read about the liver or heart and you come with certain kind of pathophysiology and pathology. But here you don't find this kind of thing. So if you take out the lens and want to study in vitro, it's not possible. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Protein content in the body. Highest protein content. Sorry, somebody was saying something?
Yeah. Nice class, fantastic slides. So can I add 2 points?
Yes, please.
So one is when you have a lens drop, what is couching? Can someone tell me what is couching? Does anyone know?
So with the help of needle, we push the vitreous cavity.
Come again. Sorry, I didn't hear you. So it's when your whole lens falls behind with the capsule. So they use either a blunt instrument or something to just push the lens in. So does a couching cause you any vitreous reaction?
No, sir.
No. When you have a lens drop, say when you're doing a phaco, does it cause you a vitreous reaction?
Yes.
Why?
So because the lens proteins are exposed.
Very good. Which lens proteins and how do they react? What sort of clinical?
So they are the sequestered ones which has not been exposed to the immune system during the development. So those proteins.
Those proteins. So what do you see? You see it as a vitritis. You see it as raised intraocular pressure and a corneal edema. So why is this important to you? So if you have a post-traumatic patient who comes to you in which the whole lens, or say you have a Weil Marchesani or a Marfan, in which the whole lens has fallen into the vitreous cavity, is it an emergency to operate it?
Anyway, should we wind up AVS, ma'am? Should we wind up?
Yes, yes, yes. We're waiting for you to wind up.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you all for the attendance and making it such a lively discussion. I'm sure we've all benefited a lot from listening to this presentation, and thank you again.